A young slave boy saved his master's wife from a devastating fire. And then everything changed. The year was 1832. South Carolina's plantations stood as monuments to inequality. But one act of extraordinary courage was about to challenge the very foundations of this brutal system. What happened in those flames would not only save a woman's life, but ignite a chain of events that no one could have imagined. This is the forgotten story of how a child born into bondage changed his destiny through a single moment of unthinkable bravery. Elijah was just 12 years old when his life on the Wilkes plantation took its fateful turn. Small for his age but sharp-minded, he moved through the sprawling cotton fields of South Carolina like a shadow, seen but rarely acknowledged. His thin frame belied the strength he had developed from years of labor that began almost as soon as he could walk. Born in the slave quarters behind the grand white-columned mansion, Elijah had never known any other life than service to the Wilkes family. Master Jonathan Wilkes ran his plantation with calculated precision. The land stretched for miles, worked by over 100 enslaved people who feared his infamous temper. A third-generation plantation owner, Wilkes took pride in what he called his enlightened approach to managing his human property, which meant he preferred financial penalties and reduced rations over the whip, though the latter was never entirely absent from plantation life. The summer of 1832 had been particularly profitable, with cotton prices rising and the Wilkes plantation producing more than ever before. But it was his wife, Mrs. Sarah Wilkes, who noticed something different in young Elijah. A northern-born woman with a quiet demeanor and unexpected moments of kindness that confused the enslaved people around her. Mrs. Wilkes had selected Elijah from the quarters after observing him helping younger children learn their tasks. "That boy has eyes that see everything," she once remarked to her husband over dinner, while Elijah stood motionless against the dining room wall. "There's an intelligence there that's quite remarkable." Unlike the other house slaves, Elijah had been assigned to assist Mrs. Wilkes with her personal errands, fetching her medicines, carrying her books, standing silently as she taught her own children their lessons in the east-facing sunroom that overlooked the manicured gardens. What no one understood was how carefully Elijah was watching, learning, and memorizing every detail of the Wilkes household. Each night, after completing his 16-hour workday and returning to the cramped quarters he shared with his aging grandmother, Nettie, he'd silently recite the words he'd overheard from Mrs. Wilkes's reading lessons to her children. He'd trace letters in the dirt floor when no one was looking. Each day, he'd observe how the plantation's power flowed like an invisible current through every interaction. How Master Wilkes's voice softened when speaking to wealthy visitors, but hardened to steel when addressing the field hands. How Mrs. Wilkes sometimes slipped extra food to pregnant women, but turned away when punishments were administered. The other enslaved people noticed Elijah's position too. Some of the older house servants warned him to be careful. "Don't you get comfortable," whispered Esther, the cook who had been with the Wilkes family for 30 years. "The closer you get to them, the further you need to keep your true self hidden." His grandmother would stroke his head at night and murmur, "The Lord gave you that quick mind for a reason, child. But quick minds need slow tongues on this plantation." But Elijah's growing awareness came with growing danger. The overseer, Mr. Daniels, a red-faced man with hands like hammers and breath that reeked of cheap whiskey, had begun watching him with suspicious eyes. Daniels had worked his way up from poor white farmer to plantation overseer through a reputation for extracting maximum labor through minimum mercy. He particularly resented the house slaves, whom he considered privileged and soft. "That boy's getting ideas," he warned Master Wilkes one evening as they reviewed the day's work ledgers on the veranda. "I see him watching everything. listening to things that ain't his business, getting too comfortable around your wife and children. Might be time to send him to the fields where he belongs. Master Wilkes had merely nodded, non-committal. Sarah finds him useful. We'll see. What Elijah couldn't possibly know was that in just 3 days' time, those same suspicious eyes would be looking at him very differently. And the flames that would change everything were already smoldering. The dry summer had turned the wooden structures of the plantation into perfect kindling, and the oil lamps that Mrs. Wilkes favored for her evening reading were accidents waiting to happen. As Elijah helped prepare the house for nightfall that evening, straightening Mrs. Wilkes's reading room and turning down the beds, he had no idea that his position in this carefully ordered world was about to be violently upended. The evening of August 17th began like any other on the Wilkes plantation. Dinner had been served promptly at 7, with Master Wilkes entertaining 2 cotton brokers from Charleston. The air hung heavy with humidity, promising a thunderstorm that hadn't yet materialized. Elijah moved silently between the kitchen and dining room, fetching fresh water and wine as directed by the head house servant, Martha. "More wine for the gentleman, boy," Master Wilkes commanded without looking at him. Elijah complied, careful not to spill a drop on the imported tablecloth that Mrs. Wilkes treasured. It had been brought from England at considerable expense, its delicate embroidery representing the kind of luxury that separated the Wilkes family from lesser plantation owners. One previous servant had been severely punished for staining it with gravy. Elijah had no intention of sharing that fate. The dinner conversation swirled around cotton prices and the growing political tensions between South Carolina and the federal government. Words like nullification and tariffs floated above the table like smoke, meaningful to the men but abstract to Elijah, who nevertheless committed them to memory. Knowledge, he had learned, was something that couldn't be taken from him. "I tell you, gentlemen, this Yankee interference will not stand," Master Wilkes declared, his cheeks flushed with wine and indignation. "South Carolina must assert her rights or lose everything we've built." One of the brokers, a thin man with spectacles that caught the candlelight, nodded vigorously. "Indeed, Wilkes. My contacts in Charleston say the governor himself is prepared to defy Jackson directly if these tariffs aren't reduced." The second broker, older and more cautious, frowned into his wine glass. "Careful talk, gentlemen. These are dangerous times for rash declarations." Mrs. Wilkes, seated at the opposite end of the long mahogany table, cleared her throat delicately. "Perhaps we might find a more suitable topic for the dinner hour." Her eyes flicked meaningfully toward the servants standing against the wall, including Elijah. Master Wilkes waved his hand dismissively. "They don't understand such matters, my dear. Besides, they have no one to tell but each other." He laughed, and his guests joined him, though the older broker's eyes lingered thoughtfully on Elijah for a moment too long. By 9 o'clock, the guests had departed, and the household settled into its nighttime routine. Master Wilkes retreated to his study with his ledgers and pipe, while Mrs. Wilkes retired to a reading room on the second floor. Their 3 children, William, Elizabeth, and young Thomas, were already asleep in the nursery wing. "Elijah, bring my reading lamp and make sure it's full," Mrs. Wilkes called as she ascended the stairs. "And fetch that new novel from the library, the one Mr. Wilkes brought from Charleston." Elijah hurried to complete these tasks, filling the ornate brass lamp with fresh whale oil and carefully trimming the wick as he'd been taught. The summer night was particularly still, with not even a whisper of breeze through the open windows. The air felt like a held breath, the kind that precedes momentous events. In the library, he located the novel Mrs. Wilkes wanted, a leather-bound volume with gold lettering on its spine. He couldn't read the title, but he recognized the shapes of the letters, having secretly practiced forming them in dirt and ash when no one was watching. One day, he promised himself, he would understand the mysterious marks that white people used to capture thoughts on paper. After delivering the lamp and book to Mrs. Wilkes, Elijah was dismissed for the evening. "That will be all," she said, already lost in the first pages of her novel. "Tell Martha I don't wish to be disturbed further. Tonight." The reading room was Mrs. Wilkes's sanctuary, a small but elegant space lined with bookshelves and furnished with a comfortable reading chair positioned near the window to catch the best light. Tonight, with darkness fallen, the room was illuminated only by the golden glow of the oil lamp, creating shadows that danced across the papered walls with each small movement of the flame. He had just reached the servants' stairs at the back of the house when the first crash of thunder shook the windows. The storm had finally arrived, and within moments, rain was lashing against the house with unexpected fury. Lightning illuminated the hallway in brilliant flashes as Elijah made his way downstairs, casting his shadow in sharp relief against the wall. Tall one moment, gone the next. In the kitchen, the remaining house servants were preparing for their own rest. Martha was banking the cooking fire, while Samuel and two younger house servants, Luella and James, sat at the worn wooden table, sharing the last crusts of bread from dinner. "Storm's a bad one," observed old Samuel, who tended the grounds. His weathered face, lined with 60 years of labor under the Carolina sun, creased with concern as another thunderclap rattled the kitchen windows. "Been too dry too long. Earth's gonna flood tonight." "The missus is reading," Elijah reported to Martha. "Says she don't want to be disturbed." Martha nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Lord help her if she falls asleep with that lamp burning. Remember what happened at the Prescott plantation last spring? Whole family nearly burned alive in their beds." Luella crossed herself. "Don't speak such things into being, Martha. It's bad luck." "It ain't luck that burns houses, girl. It's carelessness," Martha replied sharply. "Elijah, help me cover these embers properly. James, make sure the back door is latched tight against this wind." Elijah was helping Martha cover the cooking fire when they heard it, a sound different from the thunder. A crack, followed by a heavy thud from somewhere above them. It wasn't the familiar sound of the house settling, nor the expected noises of a storm. This was something else entirely. What was that? Martha froze, her hands suspended mid-motion. Her eyes lifted toward the ceiling, tracking the sound to its source. Before anyone could answer, a scream pierced through the sound of rain, high-pitched and terrified. Mrs. Wilkes. The sound cut through the kitchen like a knife, instantly transforming the atmosphere from wary calm to alarm. "Sweet Jesus," breathed Luella, clutching Samuel's arm. Elijah was moving before he could think, racing back up the servants' stairs. Behind him, he could hear Martha calling for James to fetch Master Wilkes. Her voice already fading as Elijah took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart hammering against his ribs. The smell hit him first. Smoke, thick and acrid, with the unmistakable scent of burning fabric and paper. Then he saw it. Flames, licking up the wallpaper outside Mrs. Wilkes's reading room, orange tongues consuming the delicate floral pattern. Inside, through the half-open door, he could see Mrs. Wilkes trapped behind an overturned bookcase that had caught fire. The oil lamp lay shattered on the floor, its contents feeding the rapidly spreading flames that were already reaching toward the curtains. "Help! Jonathan! Anyone!" Mrs. Wilkes cried out, her white nightdress already singed at the edges, the fine lace at its hem blackening in the heat. She was trying to push the heavy bookcase away, but it wouldn't budge. Her face, usually composed and dignified, was contorted with terror, her carefully arranged hair falling loose around her shoulders. Elijah hesitated for only a second. Master Wilkes's study was on the other side of the house. By the time anyone reached her, it might be too late. The flames were growing higher, hungrily consuming the books and papers that littered the room. Already the heat was intense enough that he could feel it from the doorway, like standing too close to the cooking fire on wash day. A rational voice in his mind, one that sounded much like his grandmother's, whispered that he should run, that risking his life for the master's wife was foolishness. What slave would willingly run toward danger for their owners? But another part of him, perhaps the same part that hungered for knowledge and dreamed of letters, couldn't turn away. Drawing his thin shirt over his nose and mouth, Elijah plunged into the smoke-filled room. The heat was immediate and overwhelming, scorching his exposed skin and making his eyes water. The smoke was worse, filling his lungs and making each breath a struggle. He could barely see Mrs. Wilkes now through the thickening gray veil. "Mrs. Wilkes, this way," he shouted, dropping to his knees where the air was clearer. The floor beneath him was already hot, the expensive carpet beginning to smolder. "Elijah, is that you? I can't move this. It's too heavy." Her voice was weaker now, choked with smoke and edged with the realization that she might not escape. Crawling forward, Elijah reached the fallen bookcase. It had tipped forward, pinning Mrs. Wilkes against her reading chair. The top of the case was already engulfed in flames that threatened to drop burning debris onto her at any moment. Books, those precious objects that contained the knowledge he coveted, were now deadly fuel, their pages curling and blackening in the heat. With strength born of desperation, Elijah braced himself against the floor and pushed at the bookcase. His muscles screamed in protest, the tendons in his neck standing out like cords as he strained against the weight. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the heavy oak piece moved, just an inch at first, then enough for Mrs. Wilkes to squeeze free. "Come," he commanded, forgetting all propriety as he grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. A burning book fell from above, landing on his shoulder. He barely felt the pain as they stumbled together toward the hallway, though he would later discover a burn in the perfect shape of a book corner branded into his skin. A strange literacy marked upon his flesh. The corridor was now filled with smoke too, but less dense. Elijah could hear shouting from below. The household was awake and aware of the danger. Master Wilkes's voice rose above the others, calling his wife's name with increasing desperation. Supporting Mrs. Wilkes, who was coughing violently and struggling to stay upright, he guided her toward the main staircase. Her nightdress was torn and blackened in places, her bare feet leaving sooty prints on the polished wood floor. She leaned heavily against him, her arm around his shoulders in a gesture of intimacy that would have been unthinkable hours before. "The children," she gasped between coughs. "Elijah, the children." "They're in the other wing, ma'am," he reassured her, though he wasn't entirely certain. "The fire hasn't reached there." They were halfway down the grand staircase when Master Wilkes appeared below, his face contorted with fear. Behind him, several house servants and the 2 field hands who served as night watchmen crowded in the entrance hall, their faces upturned and illuminated by the strange, flickering light from above. "Sarah," he cried out, taking the stairs 2 at a time to reach them. His usual composure was shattered, his hair disheveled and his eyes wild with panic. "Jonathan, Mrs. Wilkes collapsed into her husband's arms, her face streaked with soot and tears. The lamp fell when the thunder startled me. The bookcase. I couldn't. Her words dissolved into another fit of coughing. Master Wilkes looked over his wife's head at Elijah, who stood swaying slightly, his shirt smoldering in places, his hands and face blackened with soot and burned in patches. Their eyes met in a moment of strange equality. Two men who had just faced the prospect of an unimaginable loss. "You got her out?" Master Wilkes asked, his voice strangely quiet amid the chaos. There was a note of disbelief in his question, as if he couldn't reconcile the reality before him with everything he thought he knew about the world. Elijah nodded once, then dropped to his knees as the world spun around him. The smoke in his lungs, the burns on his skin, and the sheer exhaustion of the rescue suddenly overwhelmed him. The last thing he saw before consciousness slipped away was the expression on Master Wilkes's face. An unsettling mixture of gratitude, confusion, and something else Elijah had never seen directed at him before. It looked almost like respect. Behind them, the upper floor of the east wing was now fully engulfed in flames, bright against the stormy night sky. As household members rushed to form a bucket chain from the well, and field hands were roused from their quarters to help fight the blaze, no one yet understood that more than a wing of the Wilkes mansion was being transformed by fire that night. The established order of their world had just begun to burn. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but it was too little against the hungry flames. Lightning still flashed across the sky, illuminating the faces of the enslaved people who worked desperately to save their master's home. Among them, some whispered that this was God's judgment, while others feared the punishment that would follow if the house could not be saved. In the chaos, no one noticed the small figure of Elijah's grandmother, Nettie, standing apart from the others, her aged eyes fixed not on the burning building but on the unconscious form of her grandson being carried to safety. Her lips moved in a silent prayer that had nothing to do with saving the Wilkes plantation and everything to do with the spark of possibility that had been ignited this night. A different kind of fire altogether. Dawn broke over the Wilkes plantation, revealing the full extent of the night's devastation. The east wing of the mansion stood in ruins, its elegant facade reduced to blackened timbers and collapsed walls. Smoke still rose from the debris, curling into the pale morning sky like ghostly fingers. The acrid smell of burnt wood, fabric, and paper hung in the air, a pungent reminder of how quickly fortunes could change. The household had worked through the night to contain the blaze. A bucket brigade, stretching from the well to the house, had managed to save the main structure and the west wing, though water damage had left its mark on ceilings and walls. Field hands had been roused from their quarters to assist, working alongside house servants in a temporary suspension of the usual hierarchies that governed plantation life. Master Wilkes stood on what remained of the east veranda, surveying the damage with reddened eyes. His usual immaculate appearance had given way to dishevelment, shirt untucked, face smudged with soot, hair wild from running his hands through it repeatedly. Beside him stood Mr. Daniels, the overseer, whose expression vacillated between concern for his employer and calculation of how this disaster might affect his own position. "We'll need to bring in carpenters from Charleston," Master Wilkes said, his voice hoarse from shouting orders through the night. "And a new shipment of furniture, the library." He trailed off, the loss of his book collection seemingly more painful than the structural damage. "Yes, sir," Daniels replied. "And what about the regular work? Cotton's ready for picking in the south fields." Master Wilkes waved his hand dismissively. "That continues as planned. I want 10 men assigned to clearing this debris, the rest to the fields. The women can handle the washing of everything that smells of smoke." "And the boy?" Daniels asked, his tone carefully neutral. "The one who pulled out Mrs. Wilkes?" At this, Master Wilkes turned to face his overseer fully. Something flickered across his features, a complexity of emotion unusual for a man who generally displayed only two states, satisfaction or anger. "Elijah," he said, speaking the name as if testing its weight. "Where is he now?" "In the old smokehouse with the doctor," Mrs. Wilkes insisted. Master Wilkes nodded slowly. "And how badly is he hurt?" Daniels shrugged. "Burns on his hands and arms. Breathed in a lot of smoke. Doctor says he'll live, though he might not be much use for a while." "I see." Master Wilkes turned back to the ruins, his profile sharp against the morning light. "When the doctor is finished, tell him I wish to speak with him. And Daniels—" He paused, choosing his words with unusual care. "The boy is not to return to regular duties until I say otherwise." "Sir?" Daniels couldn't hide his surprise. "You heard me. Now go organize those work details." As Daniels departed, Master Wilkes remained on the veranda, his thoughts as complex as the tangle of charred beams before him. In the old smokehouse, which had been hastily converted into a temporary infirmary, Elijah lay on a pallet of clean straw covered with linen. His consciousness drifted in and out, punctuated by sharp stabs of pain whenever the doctor tended to his burns. Through half-closed eyes, he observed the unusual scene around him. Dr. Harrison, who normally treated only the Wilkes family and occasionally the more valuable slaves when their ailments threatened their working capacity, was personally applying salve to Elijah's hands. Mrs. Wilkes herself sat nearby on a wooden stool, her usual elegant attire replaced by a simple day dress borrowed from Martha. Her own hands bore minor burns, and a bandage wrapped around her left wrist where a falling ember had landed. "Will there be scarring, Doctor?" Mrs. Wilkes asked, her voice still raspy from smoke inhalation. Dr. Harrison, a portly man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, nodded gravely. "Some, I'm afraid, particularly on his left hand and forearm. But he's young. The skin will heal better than it would for you or me." Elijah tried to process this conversation through the fog of pain and exhaustion. Why was Mrs. Wilkes concerned about his scars? Why was he receiving the doctor's personal attention rather than the usual cursory treatment afforded to injured slaves? "He saved my life," Mrs. Wilkes said softly, almost to herself. "If he hadn't come when he did." The doctor made a non-committal sound as he wrapped clean bandages around Elijah's hands. Remarkable presence of mind for one so young. Most would have run the other way. From his position on the pallet, Elijah could see his grandmother, Nettie, standing quietly in the corner of the smokehouse. Her face was impassive, but her eyes never left him, communicating a mixture of pride and worry that needed no words. The door opened, allowing a shaft of morning sunlight to cut across the dim interior. Martha entered, carrying a tray with a teapot and cups. "Master says the doctor is to report to him when he's finished here," she announced, setting down the tray. Then, in a lower voice meant only for Mrs. Wilkes, "The children are asking for you, ma'am. Miss Elizabeth is quite upset about her room." Mrs. Wilkes sighed, the weight of maternal responsibilities temporarily displacing her concern for Elijah. "I'll come shortly. Thank you, Martha." She rose from the stool, smoothing her borrowed dress. "Doctor, please inform my husband that I've authorized whatever treatment the boy needs for a full recovery." As she moved toward the door, She paused beside Elijah's pallet. For a moment, she seemed about to speak directly to him, something rarely done except to issue commands. Instead, she simply touched his shoulder lightly, a gesture so unexpected that Elijah forgot to hide his surprise. After Mrs. Wilkes departed, the doctor completed his ministrations in silence. When he too had gone, promising to send more salve with Martha later, only Nettie remained with her grandson. She approached slowly, her joints stiff with age and a lifetime of labor. Kneeling beside him with difficulty, she took in his bandaged hands and the angry red marks on his face and neck. "You did a foolish thing, child," she whispered, her weathered hand gently stroking his forehead. "A brave thing, but foolish all the same." Elijah tried to speak, but his throat felt as if he'd swallowed fire. He managed only a raspy whisper. "Had to, Grandma." Nettie's eyes, clouded with cataracts but still sharp with wisdom, studied him intently. "Things gonna change now. I can feel it in these old bones. Change ain't always good for our kind." "Master Wilkes," Elijah began. "Hush now," Nettie interrupted. "Save your strength. And remember this, my Elijah. White folks' gratitude is like morning dew. Looks like diamonds in the sunrise, but burns away by noon." She leaned closer, her voice dropping even lower. "Whatever comes next, don't you forget who you are and where you come from. Your mama didn't live to see you grow, but she'd be proud of your heart. Just make sure that heart stays wise as well as good." Elijah wanted to ask what she meant, but exhaustion was pulling him back toward unconsciousness. As his eyes closed, he heard the smokehouse door open again and Daniels's voice, unusually subdued, informing his grandmother that she was needed back in the quarters. The last thing Elijah registered before sleep claimed him was the strange new feeling taking root in his chest. Not quite hope, but something adjacent to it. Something dangerous. 3 days later, Elijah sat on a wooden bench outside the kitchen, his bandaged hands resting on his lap. The doctor had declared him well enough to leave the smokehouse, though still unfit for work. This strange limbo, neither sick enough for constant care nor well enough for labor, left him in an unprecedented position on the plantation. The other slaves regarded him with a mixture of awe, envy, and suspicion. Some, like Martha and Samuel, treated him with newfound kindness, slipping him extra food and speaking to him in gentler tones. Others, particularly those who had always competed for favored positions in the household, watched him with narrowed eyes, waiting for his fall from this unexpected grace. Luella approached, carrying a cup of water. "Martha says you should drink more," she said, offering it to him. "Helps clear the smoke from inside you." Elijah nodded his thanks, awkwardly grasping the cup between his bandaged palms. As he drank, he noticed Luella glancing nervously over her shoulder. "What is it?" he asked, his voice still rough but improving daily. Luella leaned closer. "Master's been asking strange questions. About you. About whether you can read or write." Elijah nearly choked on the water. "What did people say?" "Nobody knows nothing for sure," she replied. "But there's talk. Master spent all morning in what's left of his study, writing letters. And Mrs. Wilkes has been talking about you to her sister, who's visiting from Savannah." Before Elijah could respond, the back door opened and Martha appeared. "Elijah," she called, her expression unreadable. "Master Wilkes wants to see you in his temporary office. Now." Luella's eyes widened, and she quickly took the cup from him. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. Elijah stood slowly, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. Being summoned to speak directly with Master Wilkes was unprecedented. Such meetings usually meant punishment or sale. "Do I need to change?" he asked Martha, looking down at his simple clothes. Martha shook her head. "Just come as you are. And Elijah—" She hesitated, then added, "Speak clearly and look at the floor, not his face. Whatever he asks, answer truthfully, but briefly." The walk to what had once been the morning room, and now served as Master Wilkes's temporary office, felt longer than the entire plantation. Each step brought Elijah closer to a conversation that might determine the course of his life. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind. "White folks' gratitude is like morning dew." At the door, Martha left him with a reassuring pat on his shoulder. Elijah took a deep breath, wincing at the lingering pain in his lungs, and knocked softly. "Enter," came Master Wilkes's voice from within. Elijah opened the door and stepped inside, keeping his eyes lowered as instructed. The room smelled of pipe tobacco and the brandy Master Wilkes favored in times of stress. Through his downcast gaze, Elijah could see polished boots and the edge of a desk covered with papers. "Approach, boy." Elijah moved forward until he stood before the desk. "Look at me," Master Wilkes commanded, breaking the first rule Martha had given him. Slowly, Elijah raised his eyes to meet his master's gaze. Jonathan Wilkes sat rigidly in his chair, his face composed, but his eyes revealing the strain of recent days. He studied Elijah with an intensity that was unsettling, as if seeing him for the first time. "The doctor tells me you'll recover," Master Wilkes began, "though your hands will bear scars." "Yes, Master," Elijah replied, uncertain if a response was expected. Master Wilkes leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "You saved Mrs. Wilkes's life. That fact cannot be disputed." Elijah remained silent, sensing that more was coming. "Such an act," Master Wilkes continued, "raises certain questions about your character, about your future utility to this household." He paused, his gaze still fixed on Elijah's face. "I find myself in an unusual position. The natural order of our society dictates that your kind serves mine. Yet I now find myself indebted to you." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Elijah fought the urge to shift his weight or look away. "Can you read, boy?" Master Wilkes asked suddenly, the question cutting through the tension like a knife. Elijah felt a cold fear grip his spine. Teaching slaves to read was forbidden by law in South Carolina. The penalty for a slave caught learning was severe: whipping at minimum, mutilation of fingers or hands in some cases. "No, Master," he answered truthfully. For while he recognized some letters and had practiced forming them, true reading was still beyond his grasp. "But you want to," Master Wilkes stated rather than asked. "I've seen you watching when Mrs. Wilkes reads to the children. I've noticed how you linger when there are papers about." Elijah swallowed hard. Denial would be futile and might be interpreted as lying, a punishable offense. "Yes, Master," he admitted softly. To his surprise, Master Wilkes nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "Mrs. Wilkes believes you possess unusual intelligence. She has suggested a rather unorthodox path forward." Master Wilkes rose from his chair and walked to the window, his back now to Elijah. "The fire has changed many things, Elijah. Not just the structure of this house, but perhaps its future as well." He turned back, his decision apparently made. "You will no longer work in the fields or as a general house servant. Instead, you will become my personal attendant. You will learn to manage my correspondence, maintain my schedule, and eventually, he paused, seeming to measure his next words carefully. You will learn to read and write. In secret, of course. Elijah couldn't prevent the sharp intake of breath that escaped him. Such an arrangement was not only unusual, it was dangerous and potentially illegal. This is not charity, Master Wilkes continued sharply. Nor is it a reward. It is a practical decision. A boy with your intelligence might be more valuable with education than without. You will work twice as hard as before. You will be held to standards no other slave on this plantation must meet. And you will maintain absolute discretion about our arrangement. He returned to his desk and sat down, once again the commanding master. Do you understand what I'm offering, boy? Elijah understood far more than Master Wilkes likely intended. He understood that this opportunity came wrapped in new chains of expectation, obligation, and dangerous knowledge. He understood that he was being elevated just high enough to have much further to fall. And he understood that, despite all this, it might be his only chance to gain the tools that could one day lead to something more than slavery. Yes, master, he replied, his young voice steady despite the tumult of emotions within. I understand. Master Wilkes nodded once, decisively. Good. Your new duties begin once your hands have healed. Until then, rest and prepare yourself. He picked up a letter from his desk, a clear dismissal. Send Martha in as you leave. Elijah bowed slightly and backed toward the door. As he reached for the handle, Master Wilkes spoke again. One more thing, Elijah. What happened 3 nights ago has created a unique bond between us. Do not mistake it for equality. Do not abuse my gratitude or my wife's sentimentality. The consequences would be severe. Yes, master, Elijah responded, the familiar phrase taking on new weight in this transformed relationship. Outside in the hallway, Elijah paused to steady himself against the wall, his bandaged hands trembling slightly. The world he had known his entire life had shifted on its axis, opening possibilities he had scarcely dared to imagine. Yet his grandmother's warning echoed louder than ever. White folks' gratitude is like morning dew. Looks like diamonds in the sunrise, but burns away by noon. As he went to find Martha, Elijah resolved to gather as many of those diamonds as he could before the inevitable noon arrived. 6 weeks after the fire, the Wilkes plantation had settled into a new rhythm. Reconstruction of the East Wing was well underway, with carpenters from Charleston hammering and sawing from dawn until dusk. The cotton harvest had begun in earnest, with field hands working longer hours to compensate for those assigned to the rebuilding efforts. The usual hierarchy of plantation life had reasserted itself, with one notable exception. Elijah no longer rose before dawn to help in the kitchen or tend to general household duties. Instead, his day began at 7 o'clock, when he reported directly to Master Wilkes's study, a room in the undamaged west wing that had been hastily converted from a guest bedroom. His hands had healed, though the left one bore an angry red scar that stretched from his wrist to his middle finger, a permanent reminder of that fateful night. On this particular morning, Elijah stood attentively beside Master Wilkes's desk, watching as his owner demonstrated how to properly seal a letter with wax. Observe carefully, Master Wilkes instructed, holding a stick of red sealing wax over a small flame. Too much heat and it drips everywhere. Too little and it won't adhere properly. He tilted the wax, allowing several drops to fall onto the folded edge of the letter before pressing his signet ring into the cooling substance. When he lifted it, the Wilkes family crest was perfectly imprinted in the hardened wax. Now you try, he said, handing Elijah another prepared letter and the stick of wax. Elijah took them carefully, conscious of Master Wilkes's scrutiny. His new position required a precision and attention to detail that differed greatly from his previous tasks. Over the past weeks, he had learned to brush Master Wilkes's coats, polish his boots to a mirror shine, lay out his clothes according to the day's activities, and organize his desk precisely to his liking. Each task had been demonstrated once, with the clear expectation that Elijah would perform it perfectly thereafter. The flame wavered slightly as Elijah held the wax above it, his concentration absolute. When he judged it sufficiently melted, he allowed exactly 4 drops to fall onto the letter's fold, then handed the wax back to Master Wilkes before it could drip elsewhere. "Your ring, sir?" he prompted quietly. Master Wilkes raised an eyebrow, but passed over the signet ring. This was a test, one that Master Wilkes hadn't explicitly mentioned, but that Elijah had anticipated. Handling the family seal was a significant responsibility, one that demonstrated an unusual level of trust. With steady hands, Elijah pressed the ring into the cooling wax, held it for precisely the count of 5 that he had observed Master Wilkes use, then carefully lifted it. The resulting impression was clear and deep, a perfect replica of the one Master Wilkes had created. "Acceptable," Master Wilkes said, taking back his ring. The word was as close to praise as Elijah had received in his new role. "Set these on the silver tray for Thomas to deliver to town." "Yes, sir," Elijah replied, arranging the letters neatly on the designated tray. He had quickly learned that Master Wilkes preferred to be addressed as Sir rather than Master during their private lessons. A small linguistic shift that nevertheless spoke volumes about the unusual arrangement between them. Master Wilkes consulted the pocket watch that never left his waistcoat. "It's time for your reading lesson. Mrs. Wilkes will be occupied with the children's tutor for the next hour, and I have business with Mr. Daniels in the North Fields. You know what to do?" Elijah nodded, his pulse quickening slightly. These solitary study periods were the most dangerous and most precious part of his new routine. If discovered, both he and Master Wilkes could face serious consequences, though, of course, the punishment would fall most heavily on Elijah. Once Master Wilkes had departed, Elijah moved swiftly to the bookshelf and removed a slim volume hidden behind larger books of plantation accounts. It was a child's primer, salvaged from the nursery before the fire and now repurposed for his clandestine education. He carried it to the small writing desk in the corner that had become his designated workspace and opened it to where a ribbon marked his progress. The page showed the letter M in both its capital and lowercase forms, alongside simple words beginning with that letter: man, mother, mill, mouse. Elijah traced each letter with his finger, then took a slate and chalk from the drawer. Master Wilkes had been clear. No paper was to be used for these lessons, as paper could be discovered. The slate could be wiped clean at the first sign of approach. For 20 minutes, Elijah practiced forming the letter in both its forms, then attempted to write the sample words from memory. His progress over the past weeks had been remarkable, a fact that seemed to both please and unsettle Master Wilkes. Already Elijah could recognize most letters and simple words, though stringing them together into fluid reading still challenged him. A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside, and Elijah immediately wiped the slate clean with his sleeve. By the time the door opened, he was arranging papers on Master Wilkes's desk, a task that would appear natural to any observer. It was Martha who entered, carrying a tray with coffee. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she took in the scene, Elijah standing at the master's desk rather than kneeling to clean or serve. Master Wilkes stepped out, Elijah explained, keeping his voice neutral. He said to leave his coffee and that he'd return shortly. Martha set down the tray with more force than necessary. "Mighty comfortable you're getting in here," she observed, her tone carrying a warning. "Folks are talking, you know." "I'm just doing what I'm told," Elijah replied carefully. He and Martha had once been allies in the kitchen hierarchy, but his elevation had created a distance between them. It was one of many relationships altered by his changed status. Martha responded noncommittally. "Well, when you're done doing what you're told, your grandmother's been asking after you. Says she barely sees you these days." Guilt pricked at Elijah's conscience. It was true. His new duties kept him largely separated from the other slaves, including Nettie. His meals were taken alone in the small anteroom off the study, and he now slept in a converted storage space near Master Wilkes's chambers, rather than in the quarters with his grandmother. "Tell her I'll try to visit tonight," he said, softening his tone. "If Master Wilkes doesn't need me." Martha's expression remained skeptical, but she nodded before leaving. The unspoken message was clear. Don't forget who you really are and where you belong. After she departed, Elijah returned to his lesson, though with less concentration than before. Martha's visit had unsettled him, reminding him of the precarious nature of his position. He existed now in a strange middle ground, no longer fully part of the slave community, but certainly not accepted as anything approaching an equal by the white household. It was a lonely place to inhabit. When he heard Master Wilkes's distinctive footsteps in the hallway, Elijah quickly returned the primer to its hiding place and positioned himself respectfully near the desk. The study door opened to reveal not only Master Wilkes, but also a stranger, a tall, thin white man with spectacles and a serious expression. "Ah, Elijah, good," Master Wilkes said briskly. "This is Mr. Finley, a business associate from Philadelphia. Mr. Finley, this is the boy I mentioned." The stranger studied Elijah with undisguised curiosity. "Remarkable," he commented, as if Elijah were an unusual specimen in a natural history collection. "And you say he taught himself to recognize letters?" "Not exactly," Master Wilkes replied. "He observed my wife teaching our children. The boy has an unusual memory and aptitude for imitation." Elijah kept his expression carefully blank as the men discussed him as if he weren't present. A familiar experience for any slave, though one he had experienced less frequently in recent weeks. "May I?" Mr. Finley asked, gesturing toward Elijah. Master Wilkes nodded permission, and the stranger approached, peering at Elijah over his spectacles. "Boy, can you identify this?" He pulled a small notebook from his pocket and wrote a letter on it. Elijah glanced quickly at Master Wilkes, who gave a slight nod. "That's the letter P, sir," Elijah answered, keeping his voice appropriately deferential. Mr. Finley wrote another character. "And this?" "The number 7, sir." The questioning continued for several minutes, with Mr. Finley writing increasingly complex combinations of letters and numbers. Elijah identified each correctly, though he was careful not to demonstrate too much knowledge. An instinct for self-preservation that had been honed through years of slavery. Finally, Mr. Finley turned to Master Wilkes with an expression of satisfaction. "Quite extraordinary. I've encountered similar cases in my research, but rarely with such clear aptitude. Your investment could prove quite profitable." Investment. The word hung in the air, carrying implications that made Elijah's stomach tighten. He had suspected that Master Wilkes's unusual interest in his education wasn't purely motivated by gratitude for saving Mrs. Wilkes. But this was the first concrete suggestion of an ulterior purpose. "We shall see," Master Wilkes replied noncommittally. "Elijah, you may go assist Martha in the kitchen for the next hour. Mr. Finley and I have business to discuss." "Yes, sir," Elijah responded, bowing slightly before leaving the study. As he closed the door behind him, he heard Mr. Finley say, "The experiment in Baltimore yielded excellent returns. A trained Negro with such skills can command—" The rest of the sentence was lost as Elijah moved down the hallway, but its partial content was enough to confirm his suspicions. Whatever Master Wilkes's plans for him, they involved some form of profit. The question was whether that profit would come from Elijah's service to the Wilkes family or from his sale to someone else once his education had increased his value. The thought of being sold away, from the plantation, from his grandmother, from everything familiar, sent a chill through him, despite the warm September day. Yet alongside that fear ran a contradictory current of excitement. If his value increased enough, might it eventually reach a point where he could purchase his own freedom? Such cases were rare, but not unheard of, particularly for slaves with specialized skills. As Elijah made his way to the kitchen, these thoughts tumbled through his mind. The path before him was uncertain and fraught with danger, but it also offered possibilities that had seemed unimaginable before the fire. Knowledge was power. His grandmother had always told him so. Now he was gaining knowledge at an unprecedented rate, though to what end remained unclear. In the kitchen, he found Martha kneading bread dough with forceful movements that suggested suppressed anger. She barely acknowledged his presence with a grunt. "Master Wilkes sent me to help for an hour," he explained, rolling up his sleeves. "We don't need help from the master's new pet," she replied sharply, then immediately looked regretful. "I'm sorry, Elijah. That wasn't fair." He moved to the work table and began chopping vegetables for the evening meal, falling easily back into tasks he had performed countless times before. "It's all right. I know how it looks." Martha sighed, her hands never pausing in their rhythmic work. "It's not just how it looks. It's what it means. For you. For all of us." She lowered her voice, though they were alone in the kitchen. "When one of us rises, it changes things. Makes others wonder why not them. Makes the white folks nervous." "I didn't ask for this," Elijah said quietly. "Doesn't matter. You're in it now." Martha shaped the dough into loaves with practiced efficiency. "Your grandmother's worried. Says you're walking a path between two worlds, belonging to neither." The assessment was so accurate that Elijah had no response. Instead, he changed the subject. "Where is she? I'd like to see her before I go back to the study." "Mending in the laundry room," Martha replied. "She can't do much field work anymore, so Mrs. Wilkes has her doing light tasks." She wiped her hands on her apron and gave him a long look. "Be careful, Elijah. Whatever Master Wilkes is planning for you, remember it's for his benefit, not yours." Elijah nodded, the warning unnecessary, but appreciated nonetheless. "I know who I am, Martha." But as he finished the vegetables and headed toward the laundry room to find his grandmother, Elijah wasn't entirely sure that statement was still true. The boy who had run into a burning room 6 weeks ago was becoming someone else. Someone with dangerous knowledge, divided loyalties, and ambitions that he scarcely dared acknowledge, even to himself. The laundry room was warm and humid, filled with the smell of soap and damp fabric. Nettie sat in the corner on a low stool, her gnarled fingers working a needle through a torn shirt. Her eyesight was failing, but decades of mending had made the work almost instinctual for her. "Grandma," Elijah said softly as he approached. Nettie looked up, her weathered face breaking into a smile that erased years from her appearance. "There's my boy. Come closer so these old eyes can see you proper." Elijah knelt beside her stool, allowing her to cup his face in her work-roughened hands. She studied him intently, as if reading changes written on his skin. "You're different," she pronounced finally, "carrying yourself taller, speaking clearer." Her thumb traced the scar on his hand. "Learning things too, I hear." There was no accusation in her tone, only concern and a hint of pride. Elijah had never been able to hide anything from her, nor did he try now. "Master Wilkes is teaching me letters," he admitted in a whisper, "and numbers, how to manage his correspondence." Nettie nodded slowly. Dangerous knowledge. "But powerful too," Elijah countered. "If I learn enough, maybe someday." "Shh," she interrupted, glancing around though they were alone. "Don't speak such things aloud. Dreams have ears in this place." She leaned closer. "Listen to me, Elijah. Knowledge is like fire. It can warm you or burn you to ashes. Master Wilkes isn't giving you this learning out of kindness." "I know that," Elijah assured her. "There was a man today, from Philadelphia. They talked about investment and returns." Nettie's expression darkened. "I feared as much. They're grooming you for something." She clutched his hand tightly. "Whatever comes, remember that your value isn't what they say it is. Your worth was set by God, not by men who buy and sell flesh." The simple truth of her words struck Elijah deeply. In the complex new world he was navigating, of letters and numbers, of increased responsibilities and shifting expectations, it was easy to begin measuring himself by Master Wilkes's standards of usefulness and value. "I miss you," he said simply. "I'm always here," she replied, patting his cheek. "And I'm watching. We all are." Her meaning was clear. The entire slave community was observing his unusual situation with varying degrees of suspicion, hope, and concern. A bell rang in the distance, signaling that his hour away from the study was ending. Elijah rose reluctantly, promising to visit again soon. As he walked back through the main house, he passed the open door of the parlor where Mrs. Wilkes sat with her sister, Mrs. Catherine Porter, who had extended her visit following the fire. Their voices drifted into the hallway. "Simply unprecedented, Sarah," Mrs. Porter was saying. "Jonathan risks his reputation with such an experiment." "The boy saved my life, Catherine," Mrs. Wilkes replied. "Besides, Jonathan sees it as a business matter. If Elijah can be trained to manage correspondence and accounts, it saves the expense of hiring a white clerk. And if word spreads that you're educating a slave, what then?" There was a pause before Mrs. Wilkes answered. "It's a complicated world, sister. Perhaps it's changing." "Some things shouldn't change," Mrs. Porter stated firmly. "Some boundaries exist for good reason." Elijah continued past without slowing his pace, though the conversation etched itself into his memory. Even Mrs. Wilkes, who had shown him unusual kindness, saw his education primarily as a practical matter, a cost-saving measure justified by his act of rescue. Back in the study, Master Wilkes was alone again, examining a set of architectural drawings for the rebuilt East Wing. He looked up as Elijah entered. "Ah, good. We have much to accomplish today." He gestured to the small writing desk. "Mr. Finley was impressed by your progress. I've decided to accelerate your lessons." "Yes, sir," Elijah responded, moving to the designated spot. "We'll begin with more complex words today, and next week, simple sentences." Master Wilkes pulled a book from his desk drawer. Not the primer this time, but a more advanced text. Mr. Finley believes you could be ready for basic accounting within 6 months. Accounting. The word confirmed that whatever Master Wilkes's long-term plan might be, it involved using Elijah for skilled labor that would typically require hiring a white employee. Whether that labor would be performed here on the plantation or elsewhere remained to be seen. As the lesson began, Elijah applied himself with the same diligence he had shown since this strange new chapter of his life had opened. But beneath his careful attention to letters and sounds ran a parallel current of thoughts about fire and rescue, about gratitude that burned away like morning dew, about knowledge that could warm or consume, and about a value that no master could truly determine. The path ahead was uncertain, but for perhaps the first time in his young life, Elijah allowed himself to imagine that it might lead somewhere beyond the boundaries of the Wilkes plantation, somewhere where the knowledge he was acquiring might serve his own purposes rather than his master's. It was a dangerous thought, but once ignited, it burned with a steady flame that neither fear nor caution could fully extinguish. Spring arrived at the Wilkes plantation with a riot of color. The rebuilt east wing gleamed with fresh paint, grander than before the fire, testament to Master Wilkes's increasing prosperity. 8 months had passed since Elijah's first reading lesson. 8 months of navigating the precarious space between slave and educated assistant, carefully measuring progress shown to Master Wilkes while concealing advancements achieved in stolen moments. This April morning, Elijah sat reviewing the plantation's quarterly accounts. His responsibilities had expanded considerably from those early days of sealing letters and polishing boots. Now he managed correspondence, kept meticulous records, and drafted business letters for his owner's signature. The figures from the Charleston shipment don't align with Mr. Hargrove's receipt, Elijah observed, looking up from the ledger. Master Wilkes frowned and examined the documents. Hargrove has shorted us by nearly $50. Good catch, Elijah. Such moments had become more frequent, brief acknowledgments of Elijah's competence that carried the weight of praise without crossing into inappropriate familiarity. Draft a letter to Hargrove, Master Wilkes instructed. Polite but firm. Remind him of our long association and express confidence that the discrepancy was merely an oversight. As Elijah began writing, Master Wilkes moved to the window. The Porters will be arriving next week. Mrs. Wilkes's sister and her husband are bringing their son Edward as well. He's recently completed his studies at Yale. Elijah kept his expression neutral, though the news sent a ripple of unease through him. The Porters' previous visit had been tense, with Mrs. Porter making little effort to hide her disapproval of Elijah's position. Mrs. Porter has requested that her usual rooms be prepared, Master Wilkes continued. You will need to relocate your sleeping quarters temporarily. The small room off the kitchen should suffice. Master Wilkes turned from the window, his expression hesitant. The Porter's visit presents certain complications. Judge Porter sits on the committee that oversees enforcement of the Negro Code. He is particularly concerned with regulations regarding the education of slaves. The implications were clear. During the Porter's stay, Elijah's lessons would be suspended, and his role would need to appear conventional. I understand, sir, Elijah said quietly. I'll be discreet. Instead of going directly to the kitchen for his midday meal, Elijah took a route past the newly replanted orchard where several slaves were preparing the ground. Among them was Luella, who had become his most reliable connection to the quarters he rarely visited. When she noticed him, Luella moved toward the edge of the orchard, ostensibly to empty her basket of weeds. Fancy seeing the master's shadow out in the sunlight, she teased in a low voice. Despite her words, her smile was genuine. Just stretching my legs, he replied. Any news I should know? Samuel's cough is worse, she reported. And there's talk of selling 3 families to a plantation in Georgia. Daniels was discussing prices with Master Wilkes yesterday. Which families? John the cooper and his wife and children, Isaiah, who works the cotton gin, and she hesitated, glancing around. Your grandmother's cousin Esther and her boys. The news was troubling, but not surprising. Master Wilkes had been consolidating his workforce, selling older or less productive slaves, and investing in younger men with specialized skills. I'll see what I can find out, he promised. The Porters are visiting next week. I'll be back in the kitchen quarters while they're here. Elijah reached into his pocket and withdrew a small folded paper. For your brother, he said quietly, to help with his hand. Luella's brother had been caught taking leftover food and punished with 10 lashes, which had become infected. The paper contained instructions for making a poultice from plants that grew along the creek. Make sure you destroy that after you've read it, Elijah warned. She nodded. Be careful, Elijah. Some folks say you're forgetting who you really are. The accusation stung. I haven't forgotten, he assured her. Everything I learn, every skill I gain, it's all for a purpose. In the kitchen, Martha acknowledged Elijah with a nod that was neither friendly nor hostile, a detente they had established over the months. As he ate, Mrs. Wilkes entered with a list of menus for the Porters' visit. After giving instructions to Martha, she noticed Elijah. Ah, Elijah, I was hoping to find you. Come with me, please. She led him to the small parlor where she received informal visitors. How are your lessons progressing? She asked without preamble. The question startled him. Though Mrs. Wilkes was aware of his education, indeed she had initially suggested it, she rarely inquired directly about it. Well, ma'am, he answered cautiously. Master Wilkes says I'm making satisfactory progress. She moved to a small writing desk and opened its drawer. I have something for you, a token of my continued gratitude. From the drawer, she withdrew a small book bound in worn leather. This belonged to my father. It's a collection of essays by Mr. Emerson. I thought you might find them illuminating. Elijah accepted the book with carefully concealed amazement. A personal gift from Mrs. Wilkes, a book no less, was unprecedented and potentially problematic. My husband need not concern himself with every small matter between us, she said, her voice gentle but firm. You saved my life, Elijah. That creates a bond that transcends usual arrangements. Keep it hidden, of course, Mrs. Wilkes continued, and return it before the Porters arrive. Catherine would not understand. Mrs. Wilkes studied him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. You're changing, Elijah. Education transforms a person. I see it in how you stand, how you speak, how you observe the world around you. I'm still who I've always been, ma'am, he replied, the words feeling hollow. Mrs. Wilkes smiled sadly. No, you're not. None of us remains unchanged by knowledge once acquired. That evening, Elijah made his way to the plantation office where records were stored. Using his key, he let himself in and lit a single candle, keeping it shielded to prevent the light from being visible through the windows. The slave registry confirmed Luella's information. In the margin beside Esther and her family's names was a notation in Master Wilkes's handwriting. Georgia Sale, May. Turning to another section, he located his own entry. Elijah, male, 18 years, personal servant to Master Wilkes. Value, Mazur $200. The valuation had nearly doubled his previous worth as a field hand and house servant. In his grandmother's cabin, Elijah shared the news about Esther. Nettie's intake of breath was sharp. Esther? My cousin Esther? The question was rhetorical. There was only one Esther who would matter so deeply to her. Yes, I saw it in the records tonight. His grandmother was silent for a long moment. Georgia might as well be Africa for how likely I am to see her again in this life. I'm sorry, Grandma. She shook her head slowly. Don't be sorry, child. Be watchful. Be ready. Your position gives you sight of things the rest of us can't see. Use that sight. Remember who you're seeing for. When Elijah mentioned Mrs. Wilkes's gift of Emerson's essays, Nettie's expression sharpened with interest. Any knowledge freely given is knowledge that someone thinks you should have, she said. Now tell me about your studies. What has the master been teaching you? After sharing details of his education and duties, Elijah reluctantly prepared to leave. I should go before they come looking for the master's valuable property, he said. Nettie smiled sadly. About Esther, let me be the one to tell her. Some news should come from family, not from whispers or overseers. As Elijah made his way back to the main house under a sky brilliant with stars, he felt the competing pulls of his divided existence more keenly than ever. Ahead lay the world of letters and numbers, of increasing responsibility and dangerous knowledge. Behind was the community that had shaped him, that still claimed him despite his partial removal from it. And somewhere beyond both, in a future he could barely allow himself to imagine, lay the possibility of a life defined by neither world, a life where the knowledge he was acquiring might serve purposes entirely his own.